Good morning. My name is Philip Smith. I'm a freelance interpreter in Geneva, which is where this is being recorded on a lovely spring day. I'm going to talk to you today about when to retire. And as you can see, I'm an older interpreter myself, so I may occasionally have to glance down at my crib sheet, which is just in front of me. I'm going to say something about general retirement of freelancers. I'm not going to venture onto the terrain of when retirees from the UN should retire, whether they should work on the private market. I feel that that's a discussion for another day, and perhaps someone slightly braver than me. I speak as someone for whom retirement looms, and I have to admit that some of the certainties of youth that I had about retirement have loosened their grip slightly. We must also recognise that all of us work in different markets, in different places, with different language combinations, so it's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all approach to this. All of us are different. Retirement, statutory retirement, was established a long time ago when people did very gruelling work, so they would retire at 60 or 65 and often then die at 67 or 68. But of course, that doesn't apply to those of us who do what are ultimately sedentary jobs. It is said that as a freelance interpreter, as any of us as a freelance interpreter, we're only as good as our last job. And I think that holds good whether you're young, middle-aged or old. Therefore, the kind of test that we have to pass is the one where we need to satisfy the organizer of the meeting that we're up to the job, that we meet their exacting professional standards. A good example is that older people in some countries have to resit their driving test. And I think it's fair to say that every time we do a meeting, we're resetting a test. Experience does count for something in this profession. The generation, my generation, we cut our teeth before the days of computers. We also cut our teeth in the days when there was perhaps more of an exchange between delegates. There was a real discussion taking place rather than presentation after presentation. It's hard to believe it, but in those days people didn't actually read their speeches. They may have had a couple of memory notes, but they just talked to each other. And I think that that stood us in very good stead and really helped us to develop the core skills of interpreting. And I think those core skills still have their place in the booth. Now, of course, the younger generation feels that they would get more work and they would themselves be able to do the work that would acquire them those same skills if people of my age stepped aside. All of this, of course, is compounded by the fact that markets are shrinking, or if not shrinking, certainly changing. Here again, in a smaller market, people feel that those of us who've been working for a number of years should step aside so as to afford an opportunity to the younger generation. But everybody's story is different, and there may be any number of reasons why people don't want to retire. I mean, the first is money. People may have neglected to save for their old age, and some people may have had situations they've had to deal with in their life that have precluded them from saving. I mean, we all know life isn't always fair. Many years ago, when he was the president of AIC, Albert Daly said that membership of AIC should be contingent on the applicant having pension arrangements in place. What he wanted to do, and what a number of people have wanted to do, is to counter what in some cases had become a kind of systemic improvidence. Now, we do have two funds in AIC, the CPIC and the CPIT, and I'm not going to go into the financial models, but I think all of us know that a major failing, and I'm talking to you in Geneva, of course, a major failing is that if you work in the United Nations sector, you do not have to put your money into a fund, unlike in the European Union, where if you don't put the money into a fund, you forfeit it. So I don't think there's much we can do about that here. The reasons why that system grew up in the UN, I really don't really know. They're lost in time. And given the fact that AIC and the UN have just re-signed the new agreement, and it's an evergreen agreement, things aren't likely to change there soon. Now, people may want to keep working, but not necessarily for financial reasons. I think we all admit that work gives your life structure, it gives you routine, and to suddenly lose all that can be quite difficult, quite damaging. You hear people say, oh, he doesn't want to retire because he's got nothing else in his life. Of course, the suggestion being by the person saying it that he lives a life of endless interest and creativity. But I think it's a fair point that simply turning your back on work after many years doing it, being, if you like, in the thick of things, can be very difficult. And this doesn't just apply to interpreters, this applies to people in all walks of life. And I think we're very blessed in interpreting because we do stimulating work, mentally challenging work. We work with lovely colleagues, excellent colleagues, always fun. And it's a fun job, isn't it? Well, I've always found it a fun job, otherwise I wouldn't have stuck at it so long. When we were young interpreters in the late 70s and early 1980s, some of us swore that we would tell each other when it was time to kind of step down. In those days, I think we were all aware that there were certain colleagues who were working one beyond what you might be called their best before date, and we were determined that this wouldn't happen to us. Now, assuming that group were all together, which they're not, they're now spread across 5 continents, I mean, would we really tell each other that, I think it's time that you stopped? I really don't think we would. I think it's very personal and could be quite hurtful, and it could even be the end of a friendship. So I think we can say that the levitational certainties of youth have lost some of their doctrinaire conviction. My own view is that as you grow old, you do grow less tolerant of certain things. I think you grow less tolerant of poor speaking, and we're not short of poor speaking, are we? And there's this aspirational compunction to speak English all the time, which sometimes is a bit odd, I suppose, particularly for those of us who grew up speaking English and for whom it's just what we speak. And also, I mean, other things were easier when I was a youngster. I mean, just a simple thing like changing your air ticket. Nowadays, it seems to create a major sort of catastrophe within an airline. People, they have to rewrite tickets and, reset algorithms and all that. 30 years ago, they could just put a sticker on the ticket and you were done. But ultimately, when you think about it, all of us are just self-employed freelancers. Nobody owes us a living, so they can hire us if they want to. The age of the interpreter is irrelevant, isn't it? It really boils down to whether an interpreter who is hired can do the job. And as I've said, the older generation does bring some experience to the booth, hard-won from those pre-computer days. And I think you should note this, I can remember times when the English booth worked flat out. And I think such quaint memories must be worth something. Thank you.